All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep into a truly terrifying case. The story of Robert Hansen, the butcher baker of Alaska.
Oh, yeah. This one is going to be a chilling one.
It really is. And we're going to be going through excerpts from a detailed document about his life, his crimes, trying to understand how this seemingly ordinary man, a baker of all things,
Yeah.
became a serial killer.
Right. It's incredible, isn't it? You have this respected community figure on one hand, and on the other hand, this predator that terrorized Alaska for over a decade.
Yeah, it's like a real-life Jekyll and Hyde situation.
Exactly.
And the source material really dives deep into his background, starting with his childhood in Iowa.
Yep.
Not exactly the Alaskan wilderness that he would later become infamous for.
Right.
What was he like in those early years?
Well, the document paints a picture of a pretty isolated child, struggling with a stutter, severe acne. And it seems like his relationship with his father was very strained. The source describes the father as domineering. All of this likely contributed to Hansen becoming withdrawn, harboring resentment.
So that classic setup for some serious internal struggles.
Exactly.
And the document mentions some red flags even in his teens.
Mm.
In 1960, he was arrested for arson,
Oh, wow.
setting fire to a school bus garage.
Yeah.
Apparently an act of revenge for being unpopular in high school.
Yeah.
He actually served time in prison for that.
And it was during his incarceration that he received a diagnosis of manic depression and schizophrenic episodes.
Oh, wow.
So looking back, these early signs are critical. The source points out that this was potentially a missed opportunity for intervention,
Right.
a chance to address these very deeply rooted issues.
Yeah. It's easy to say in hindsight, but you can't help but wonder, what if someone had intervened then?
Right.
Could it have changed the course of events?
Absolutely.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
So we've got a troubled childhood criminal behavior, a serious mental illness diagnosis.
Uh-huh.
Then he gets married
Okay.
twice and eventually relocates to Alaska in 1967.
Okay.
Did moving to Alaska trigger something?
It's tough to say for sure, but what we do see in Alaska is this very stark contrast between his outward persona and his inner turmoil.
Okay.
He builds a life. He gains a reputation as a skilled hunter, a family man, someone people like and trust.
Yeah.
Yet beneath the surface, this darkness is festering.
Yeah. Talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly.
And the sources go on to detail Hansen's early crimes in Alaska.
Okay.
And it seems that things escalated pretty quickly.
Yeah.
He was arrested twice in 1971 for abducting and attempting to rape women.
Wow.
And what's striking is that one of the victims was a housewife and the other a sex worker.
This detail is really revealing. It suggests that Hansen wasn't fixated on a specific type of victim.
Interesting.
This wasn't simply about targeting women in vulnerable professions. The source suggests that his compulsion to exert power and control transcended any specific demographic.
So this wasn't just about targeting sex workers, it was about the power dynamic, that he could overpower them.
Yeah.
And sadly, in 1971, he manages to manipulate the justice system. He receives a relatively light sentence after pleading no contest to assault, and a rape charge was dropped as part of a plea bargain.
It's a really crucial point. The source emphasizes that this light sentence allowed Hansen to continue operating under the radar, escalating his crimes unchecked. It really does raise the question, did the justice system fail to recognize the danger he posed?
It's a question that haunts this entire case, and tragically, as the source reveals, Hansen didn't stop there. In 1976, he was arrested again, this time for larceny.
Okay.
Once again, he served a relatively short sentence. It seemed like a missed opportunity to connect the dots,
Right.
to see that pattern of escalating criminal behavior.
Looking back, it's frustratingly clear that Hansen was exhibiting very classic predatory behavior, testing boundaries, pushing the limits, and each time he faced minimal consequences.
Yeah.
This lack of accountability, the source suggests, may have emboldened him, fueling his descent into even darker acts.
And this is where things take a truly terrifying turn. Okay.
The source material begins to refer to him as the Butcher Baker at this point. It's a nickname that sends chills down your spine. Why this specific name?
The name Butcher Baker really speaks to that chilling duality of his crimes. On the one hand, you have this image of Hansen the baker, a seemingly ordinary man. On the other hand, you have the brutality of his actions. It was during this period that his modus operandi took a very horrifying shape. He would stalk women, often those he perceived as vulnerable, like sex workers or dancers,
Okay.
learning their routines, their vulnerabilities.
It sounds like he was very meticulously planning these attacks, which makes it even more terrifying.
Right.
But what did he do once he had chosen a victim?
The source describes a horrifying ritual. He would abduct these women at gunpoint, taking them first to his home and then to these remote locations in the Alaskan wilderness,
Okay.
where he would hunt them.
Hold on, hunt them. This wasn't just about killing.
Right.
It was about something much more sinister. Exactly. This is where the source connects Hansen's crimes to a very deep psychological need for power and control.
Okay.
He wouldn't just kill his victims, he would release them into the wilderness.
Oh my God.
Armed with only his hunting skills and a Ruger Mini-14 rifle, turning their terror into a twisted game.
It's almost unimaginable cruelty.
It is.
It's like something straight out of a horror movie, except this was real life and real women were losing their lives.
Absolutely.
Did he ever admit to how many victims there were?
He did. But his confessions, as detailed in the source, were this very strange mix of bravado and self-pity. He eventually admitted to killing at least 17 women.
17.
But investigators, based on the evidence and the X marks on his map, believed that the true number could be much higher.
Oh my gosh.
It's a chilling thought that there could be more victims out there. Their story's still untold.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that these weren't just numbers. They were daughters, mothers, sisters,
Absolutely.
whose lives were stolen. The source mentions a few of these victims. One that really stuck with me was Sherry Morrow, a topless dancer who vanished in 1981.
Sherry's story is particularly heartbreaking because her body wasn't found for a year.
A year.
The source points out a detail that is just disturbing. The evidence suggests she was redressed after death.
What?
This detail speaks volumes about Hansen's psychological state. It wasn't just about the kill, it was about exerting control even after death.
That's a level of depravity that's hard to comprehend.
It is.
Another victim mentioned is Megan Emmerich, a 17-year-old who simply vanished from her boarding school in 1973, leaving all of her belongings behind. It's like she just disappeared into thin air.
That's the truly terrifying aspect of Hansen's crimes. He used the vast Alaskan wilderness to his advantage, turning it into his hunting ground. It's a stark reminder that even in seemingly safe environments, evil can lurk, preying on the vulnerable.
It makes you question how many other potential victims might have crossed paths with Hansen, how many close calls there might have been.
Right.
But his reign of terror couldn't last forever.
No.
How did it finally come to an end?
Well, it was a combination of luck, brilliant investigative work, and the extraordinary bravery of one of his victims, Cindy Paulson.
Cindy Paulson.
Her story, as detailed in the source, is one of those rare glimmers of hope in this otherwise very dark tale.
Ah, Cindy Paulson. I can't wait to hear more about her story and how she managed to escape Hansen's clutches. That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we left off talking about Cindy Paulson.
Right.
And she really becomes a pivotal figure in this case.
She does.
Her story is one of incredible bravery in the face of just unimaginable terror.
It is.
Can you tell us more about her ordeal?
Yeah, so it's June of 1983 when Hansen abducts 17-year-old Cindy.
Okay.
The source describes how he follows his usual pattern, holding her captive at his house, subjecting her to unimaginable horrors. But Cindy refuses to become just another statistic. She fights back.
That takes immense courage,
It does.
especially considering she was just a teenager.
Right.
It's hard to even fathom what she must have gone through. What does the source say about how she managed to escape?
So Hansen drives Cindy to Merrill Airport.
Okay.
His plan was to fly her to his remote cabin, this secluded shack in the Alaskan wilderness. Can you imagine the terror she must have felt knowing where he was taking her?
It's a chilling thought, the isolation, the helplessness.
Right.
The Alaskan wilderness is beautiful, but can also be so incredibly unforgiving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But as Hansen was preparing his plane, Cindy sees an opportunity.
Okay.
Now, she had been handcuffed, but somehow she manages to free herself and make a run for it.
She escaped while he was right there.
She did.
That's incredibly daring. What happened next?
She was so incredibly lucky. She manages to flag down a passing truck driver
Oh, wow.
who takes her to safety. And get this, she was still handcuffed when she reported the crime to the police.
That's a powerful image, a testament to her courage and determination to survive.
It is.
You would think that her testimony coupled with the handcuffs would be enough to put Hansen away for good.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't that simple.
Really?
The source highlights how Hansen, using his nice guy persona,
Uh-huh.
managed to convince the police that Cindy's story was fabricated.
Oh, wow.
He even had an alibi.
Oh, no.
Remember, this was before widespread DNA testing and sophisticated criminal profiling?
So Hansen was able to exploit the limitations of the justice system at that time.
Exactly. He slipped through the cracks yet again.
It's infuriating to read how close they were to catching him
I know.
at that point.
All right.
However, the source makes it clear that Cindy's bravery planted a seed of doubt.
It did.
It was a turning point, even if it didn't lead to immediate justice.
It was.
So how did they finally connect Hansen to the other murders?
Well,
Enter Detective Glenn Floth.
yes.
Right.
Detective Floth plays a crucial role.
Okay.
He was investigating a series of unsolved murders in the area and began to suspect a connection. He sensed there was a larger pattern at play.
What did Detective Floth do differently that allowed him to make progress where others had failed?
Floth realized he needed help. He reached out to the FBI, requesting a psychological profile of the likely killer.
Interesting.
The source reveals that it was this decision that ultimately cracked the case wide open.
This is where the legendary John Douglas enters the picture.
Yes,
Right.
the Mindhunter himself.
I am fascinated by criminal profiling, and Douglas is considered one of the pioneers in the field.
He is. And the profile he created was eerily accurate.
Okay.
He described the killer as an experienced hunter, someone with low self-esteem, a history of rejection by women, possibly even a scudder.
That description fits Hansen to a T.
It does.
It's almost like Douglas was looking right at him,
Right.
armed with this profile. Did the police finally have enough to go after Hansen?
Well, the profile was a game changer. Detective Floth and the Anchorage Police Department secured a warrant to search Hansen's home, his vehicles, and his plane.
Okay.
And what they uncovered was truly damning.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. What did they find?
They found jewelry that belonged to some of the missing women, a stash of firearms, including that .223 caliber Ruger Mini 14 rifle.
The same type of rifle used in Sherry Morrow's murder.
Yes, the same one.
Hmm.
But the real smoking gun, if you will, was an aeronautical chart
Okay.
found hidden behind Hansen's headboard.
Okay.
It had 37 little X marks on it.
37 X marks. Those must have been...
Body disposal sites.
Oh my gosh.
Each mark represented a victim, a life brutally taken.
It sends chills down your spine just thinking about it.
Well, no.
With that kind of evidence, Hansen had nowhere left to hide. Did he confess right away?
Not initially. The source describes how he initially denied everything, then tried to shift blame, portraying himself as a victim of circumstance.
Oh, wow.
But finally faced with the overwhelming evidence, he cracked.
So he confessed, but what about the X marks?
Right.
Did he explain those? Did he reveal the identities of all of his victims?
That's where it gets even more complicated.
Oh.
Hansen agreed to cooperate, but only as part of a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to 4 murders in exchange for information about the other victims and the location of their remains.
He was basically trading information for a lighter sentence.
Actually, it wasn't about a lighter sentence. He was already facing multiple life terms.
Oh, okay.
The plea bargain was more about getting him to cooperate in locating the victims' remains so their families could have some closure.
That makes sense. I can't imagine the agony of not knowing what happened to a loved one.
Right.
Did he hold up his end of the bargain?
He did to an extent. He helped investigators locate 12 additional grave sites, many of which were in extremely remote and difficult to reach areas.
It's disturbing, isn't it?
It is.
This man who committed these monstrous acts was also the key to bringing some peace to the families he had destroyed.
It's a very complex situation, ethically speaking.
Yeah.
And the source points out that some families felt betrayed by the plea deal, believing that Hansen should have been held accountable for all of his crimes.
It's hard to argue with that sentiment. The victors and their families deserve justice, and it feels like he got away with a lot.
It's a valid point. But at the same time, finding those remains brought a sense of closure to some families. It allowed them to finally lay their loved ones to rest.
So a plea deal was struck. Hansen helped locate some of the remains.
Right.
But what about the other X marks on his map?
Yeah.
The ones he never explained.
This is where the source leaves us with some lingering questions. Some of those X marks remain unidentified. It's possible they represent more victims,
Oh, wow.
their stories lost to time, and the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness.
That's a haunting thought, to think there could be families out there still searching for answers and never knowing what happened to their loved ones.
It's a sobering reminder that sometimes, even with the best efforts of law enforcement, some mysteries remain unsolved. And for the families of those missing, the pain and the uncertainty continue.
It's important that we remember those victims.
Absolutely.
Those whose stories might never be fully told.
We should.
But let's shift gears a bit. What happened to Hansen after he confessed?
Okay.
What was his ultimate fate?
Well, as part of the plea bargain, Hansen was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow, 461 years. That's essentially a life sentence.
Exactly. He was initially sent to a federal prison in Pennsylvania,
Okay.
but was later transferred back to Alaska to serve out his sentence.
Okay.
He died in prison in 2014 at the age of 75.
So he spent the rest of his days behind bars paying for his crimes. It's a small comfort, I guess, knowing that he didn't get away with it completely.
Right.
But this case raises so many questions about the nature of evil,
It does.
about how someone like Hansen could operate for so long undetected.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that monsters can often hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
They can be our neighbors, our colleagues, even people we trust.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how many other Robert Hansens are out there.
Right.
How do we prevent such tragedies from happening again?
Those are questions that continue to challenge us. And while there are no easy answers, cases like this remind us of the importance of awareness, of trusting our instincts, and of speaking out against any behavior that seems suspicious or harmful.
We all have a role to play in keeping our communities safe. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier,
Okay.
the impact of Hansen's crimes on the victims and their families. It's important that their stories are not forgotten.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Each one of those X marks on Hansen's map represents a life cut short, a family shattered.
Right?
And while we've discussed a few of the victims, there are many others whose stories deserve to be told.
Let's take a moment to remember those victims.
Yes.
To honor their memory.
Absolutely.
One victim that stands out in the source material is Andrea Altieri. She was last seen getting into a taxi in 1981. She told her friends that she was meeting a guy for a photo shoot, possibly some exotic dancing, and then she simply vanished.
It was during the search of Hansen's home that they found a necklace that belonged to her. Right.
A seemingly small detail, but a crucial piece of evidence linking Hansen to her disappearance.
Right.
It's heartbreaking to imagine the pain that necklace must have caused her family, a tangible reminder of their loss.
It's a stark reminder that behind every missing person's case, there's a family, a community grappling with unimaginable grief and loss.
Absolutely.
The source also mentions Paula Goulding,
Okay.
a dancer who disappeared in April of 1983. Her body was later found buried near the Nick River,
Yes,
and Hansen admitted to killing her during his confession.
he did. He described how he abducted her, drove her to a remote area, and shot her when she tried to escape.
Ah.
He even led investigators to her gravesite.
It's hard to believe that someone could be so callous, so devoid of empathy.
The source suggests that for Hansen, these murders were almost like a sport, a way to satisfy his twisted need for power and control.
It's a disturbing thought, but we can't let his depravity overshadow the lives of the women he killed.
No, we can't.
There were daughters, mothers, sisters, friends.
They had dreams, aspirations, lives that were tragically cut short.
Yes, they did.
Their stories are a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of cherishing every moment,
Absolutely.
and the need to stand up against injustice whenever we see it.
We have to.
And as we conclude this deep dive into the Robert Hansen case, let's take a moment to reflect on the lives lost.
We should.
The families forever changed by this tragedy.
Yes.
Let's also acknowledge the courage of Cindy Paulson,
Yes,
whose bravery helped bring this predator to justice.
absolutely.
And let's remember that we all have a role to play in creating a safer world.
We do.
A world where stories like this become less frequent.
Yes,
A world where every life is valued and protected.
that's the goal.
It's a goal worth striving for.
Yeah.
It's hard to shake this feeling that this case, the Robert Hansen case, is like a puzzle with some pieces still missing. We've talked about the confirmed victims, but there's still so much we don't know. Those unidentified X marks on his map, the ones he refused to explain, what do you make of that?
Yeah. It's a question that has haunted investigators for years. Some believe those marks could represent even more victims lost to time and the vastness of that Alaskan wilderness.
And we may never know for sure.
Right.
It's a chilling reminder that even with a confession and a conviction, some answers remain elusive.
You know what's fascinating is that the source hints at a possible psychological motivation for Hansen's silence.
Okay.
It suggests that by withholding information, he maintained some degree of control, even from behind bars. You know, it's a twisted legacy, knowing that he held secrets that continue to torment investigators and the families of his victims.
It's like those secrets were his last remaining weapon, a way to exert power even in defeat.
Exactly.
But it must be so incredibly frustrating for the families knowing that there might be more victims out there, more stories waiting to be uncovered.
Oh, absolutely. It highlights the limitations of even the most thorough investigations. We can piece together the evidence, we can analyze the psychology,
Yeah.
but sometimes the full truth remains just out of reach.
It's a sobering thought. And it brings us back to that central question we've been grappling with throughout this deep dive. How could someone like Robert Hansen, a seemingly ordinary man, commit such horrific acts?
The big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The source really explores this in depth, delving into his troubled childhood, his mental health struggles, and the societal factors that may have contributed to his descent into darkness.
But ultimately, there are no easy answers.
Right.
We can analyze, speculate, we can try to understand, but the reality is that evil often defies explanation.
You've hit on a crucial point. We tend to crave simple explanations, neat and tidy narratives
Right.
that help us make sense of the world. But the truth is often messy, complicated, unsettling.
Yeah.
And the Robert Hansen case is a stark reminder of that.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway from this deep dive into such a disturbing chapter of Alaskan history?
I think one of the most important takeaways is the importance of awareness.
Okay.
The Robert Hansen case really shattered that illusion that evil always wears a mask.
Mhm.
He was a respected member of the community,
Mhm.
a husband, a father.
Yeah.
No one suspected the darkness that lurked beneath the surface.
It's a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving
Right.
and that monsters can lurk in the most unexpected places.
You can. And that's why it's so crucial to trust our instincts, to pay attention to those subtle red flags, those gut feelings that tell us something isn't right.
We often dismiss those feelings telling ourselves we're being paranoid or overreacting,
Right.
but sometimes those instincts can be life-saving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another key takeaway is the importance of speaking out.
Okay.
Cindy Paulson's bravery is such a powerful example of this.
Yeah.
She refused to be silenced, even when faced with unimaginable fear and doubt.
Her story reminds us that even one voice can make a difference, that speaking up can save lives.
It's true, and it highlights the need to create a culture where victims feel empowered to come forward,
Right.
where they are believed and supported.
That's so important, too. Often victims are silenced by shame, fear, or just a lack of trust in the system.
Yeah.
We need to do better to create a society where survivors feel safe and supported.
We do. And finally, I think this deep dive really underscores the resilience of the human spirit.
Oh.
Despite the darkness and tragedy of this case, there are stories of hope and survival.
Cindy Paulson's story is a testament to that, her courage, her determination to escape to tell her story. It's an inspiration.
It really is, and it's a reminder that even in the face of just unimaginable evil, the human spirit can endure, can overcome, and can find a path towards healing.
So to our listeners out there, remember the victims honor their memory and be vigilant.
Yes, be vigilant.
Trust your instincts, speak out against injustice, and never underestimate the power of one voice to make a difference.
You got it.
And remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the chilling case of Robert Hansen. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.